And it turns out, actually, even in January on the 30th, someone had said something about Jesus. How can anyone, let alone yourself, take you seriously if you continue to work for them? Virtue signaling is unpleasant enough, but not even holding these virtues you claim to have, embarrassing. And she says, I don't call it having virtues, you do. I'm not currently working for them and don't have plans to. 3 months later, I'll have to decide. I also have a child to feed. She never bloody stops using that child as a shield, does she? That Blizzard guy's not allowed to, probably because he's a man, right? But she's allowed to do it all day long and therefore have bigger priorities over whether you take me seriously or not. Oh no, it's not about whether he takes you seriously. It's about whether you care about people who aren't straight being executed in that country by the government that sets the laws, and you care about educating yourself to not work with people who would kill your gay friends. It's not about whether this guy likes your tweet or not. What an outrageous, disingenuous way to frame this conversation. Because thought Frankie didn't work for people that would kill her friends. Remember, she cares about people killing cats in a video game, but in real life, killing her friends, hypocrisy at its finest. My tweet said we. The industry went in a direction I could not control. So by we, she was speaking on behalf of everyone in the esports industry, but not specifically herself. How many times did I just show you in this video? She said she'd made mistakes. She wouldn't do that again. It's something she wouldn't do again. You shouldn't do it because that's a company owned by the Saudi government. Governments control the laws and they set the terms and they're the ones. And let's learn, guys, look up about which countries would kill people if you be straight. Holy shit. And now it was just a we and she's excluded herself from it. The industry went in a direction I could not control towards working with people you say would kill your gay friends. Sounds like you can't work in the industry, love. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've turned down the millions of dollars. I don't work with ESL. Why can't you? Oh, that's right, because you have that daughter that you have as a fucking shield right against all this bullshit. So when someone does die for being gay in that country, if that is indeed what happens by your words, just send them a message before they die and say, sorry, I can't help you or speak out. But by the way, I have a daughter and don't worry, she's being very well fed from my work at ESL Impact. Man, a fucking live.
Reginald, apparently, this is the logic of TSM fans, should be forgiven for any negative behaviour he's expressed over the years. It should all be forgotten and it should never be brought up again. Because he was younger and it was years ago. But that doesn't apply to anyone else in the entire scene. So they can constantly reference me, they can say about things they think I've done that were wrong, they can reference comments I made 3 years ago, years and years after the fact, in threads that have nothing to do with the topic, in threads that aren't even about me, but someone just happens to bring me up. That's somehow fair game, but it's not to talk about Reginald, because, you know, be reasonable, you know, he's matured and he's changed a lot as a person. No one else is allowed to change, though. We're all the same as we were 5 years ago. But Reginald, again, he's undergoing incredible change. He's like the fucking, a tesseract of, like, infinite possibility that exists outside of our dimension, and you only ever see one small facet of him at a time. And if you could perceive outside of reality as TSM fans do and connect with him on some spiritual dimension in the crown chakra, then you would understand what Reginald is and the kind of multi-dimensional being he is, whereas the rest of us are all one-dimensional black and white cartoons of a caricature of what you thought we were 5 years ago. That's the logic of the TSM fans and how they apply it. Likewise, if I write an article, this is the TSM mentality, if I write an article celebrating TSM, something they did in the past, some great accomplishment, or a player in TSM, or I defend TSM, as I did, for example, when people tried to make out like they were always shit because they did badly at the last Worlds in that article I did, then in that scenario, you know what? All of a sudden, yeah, it's a good article, that's what they'll say. Some of them will claim, I was always kind of a fan of Thorin as well. I'm glad he came round to the right side and the right way of seeing things. Some of them will be like, finally, real journalism. But if you critique them, and I've obviously done that many times, suddenly I was always a hater. I've always downplayed all TSM successes they will claim, even though factually you can prove objectively that's not the case. And I'm only doing all of this because of the basis of a personal grudge, either with Reginald from years ago, even though, again, that wouldn't make sense because why wouldn't I downplay Bjergsen then? Or just a hatred of TSM as an organisation. It's never the fans, by the way. It's never their behaviour that might provoke being negative towards them, but they provoke the idea that, in fact, sometimes they will claim, oh, because he hates TSM fans, he downplays the team. I guess they do that, actually, even though I've obviously never done that. They never stop to think that there is no historical basis for me to dislike TSM as a team. Now, I can dislike TSM fans, and I'll talk about TSM fans that way. I can dislike Reggie, I can talk about Reggie that way. But TSM as a team, I have no historical basis to dislike. I mean, I came in when they were the best team in NA, and I said they're the best team in NA. Whenever they've been the best, I've acknowledged them as the best. When they're not the best, I acknowledge that they're not the best. Internationally, they have never been close to the best, therefore I've never acknowledged them as close to the best.
So here's the key thing to note when you talk about these groups. You can never complain about the groups realistically if you're TSM, because if you're the pool top seed and the group ends up being hard for you, you were just shit then. You joining the group if you're TSM makes the group easier. I mean, this was the definition of fucking free SM. These guys were freeload for everyone they were playing, even LGD, who, as we said, struggled. And by the way, didn't get out of the groups. The only Chinese team to not get out of the groups. Because 3 of them got out, it looks like, oh, they all did awesome. It's like, we're just disowning LGD, apparently. I mean, to be fair, lost Fnatic, right? So, if you look at it, if I'm Fnatic, I'm LGD, I'm fucking glad I got TSM. I'm fucking hell. If I'm Fnatic, that could have been Down One Gaming. I don't want that team. If I'm Gen G, that could have been Top Esports. Why the fuck would I want to play this? So I think pretty much everyone was happy to get this group with TSM because it meant that, right, let's look at the other two. That's who we're competing against. No matter what you say about scrims and week one, who gives a fuck? So let's just be real. As the title of the video implies, TSM made history. Hey, good job, guys. But it's like when you break a record, but it's a shit record, like most interceptions in the NFL or something. That just shows like they've got something really flawed with how they recruit or think about coaching for my money. Or certain players or owners don't want proper coaches and they think they know better about the game because they win the domestic championship, at least in the past and for this last split. Now, as I've mentioned on other talk shows, basically, if they'd really wanted him, they probably could have had Youngbuck, in my opinion, one of the greatest coaches from any country. Listen, maybe in game knowledge he's not the greatest, but here's like people skills, which I think is exactly one of the problems that TSM has. The structure, how they communicate, the passive-aggressive nature of scrims. I told them they could have this. I told it to TSM brass to their fucking faces. They didn't. They just ignored me, and they just went and got Peter Zhang instead, put him as their coach, right? They could also potentially have had Peter Dunn over at Mad Lions. They're not paying mega bucks. There's a reason he's left right now. Like, after his year in Splice, why wouldn't you want this guy? He's not someone you want to have at your team. Technically, yeah. Let me think, actually, what was that? Whatever. So, okay, so they fire Peter Zhang. By the way, nobody made them do that. Nobody made them fire their coach after one split. Like, Cloud9 doesn't fire their coach after one split. Does Team Liquid fire coaches after one split? What are you doing? Like, you did that. So then when you have problems in the summer split and problems at World, well, that's your own fault. Like, you said, this is the guy I want for my whole year. Oh, shit, it's gone bad. Fire him after one split. You can't do, this is what TSM and TSM players do all the time. They create a problem, they choose a problem, and then they turn around and go, well, look at this problem. I can't be held responsible for this, even though I am entirely responsible for creating the scenario. It's like if you shit your own bed, and then you go, oh, no, I'm going to have to sleep in a shitty bed. It's like, well, what are you going to blame except yourself, mate? Like, a fairy didn't come in and fucking do it, did they?
Then you go the other way. You go to a fully closed system where you just invite all the teams and there's nothing that can be done in terms of open qualifiers. That sucks as well. Because now if a team does come along, like the Kaboom team back in 2015, or like a Vega Squadron in 2016, 2017, or like Quantum Bellator Fire, and they really can battle their way through some kind of qualification system, then cool. We want them to be able to potentially get into the major. But we want it that most of the slots are determined by the circuit so we know who the best teams are and they get there. And then if these other teams, as another way of qualifying, can get through there, not from invite or circuit points or qualify, if they can get through another type of qualifier in the minor, fair enough. Then they can join it and we'll have a couple of slots for that. But also, if they flunk, doesn't matter. We've got the other top 14, 16, 18, whatever teams in the world and a couple that flail but made it there legitimately is not a big deal. The in-between, which, as you've noticed, either uses a circuit point system or an invite system, people will always ridiculously play devil's advocate and make really unfair false equivalencies by being like, but that's so tricky, isn't it? Because who's going to determine what events are the big circuit points and who's going to be the one who picks the invites? And they say this as though we're picking a random person out the crowd and he's just going, well, I love NIP and I love Virtus Pro and I love Existence, get him in there. That's not what would be happening. We'd be picking either an expert to do it, and again, I don't care who the expert is. Make the guys from HLTV.org do it. I trust that they'll pick the top 5 to 6 teams without fail. Whether they'll do 7 or 8, maybe I'd disagree, but it'll be a better system than we have right now.
In terms of Nex coming back, right, obviously there's the angle that he's supposed to be injured, right, and maybe he's going to get surgery. And now they've said, returning to the roster will be Johannes Nex Maggot, who has received
medical retention for his wrist pains the past weeks and is now able to compete again. Fortunately, upon further consultation with his doctors, we learned that surgery isn't required for his recovery. He will still undergo regular therapy to make sure his wrist remains in a good condition. That makes the surgery angle sound suspicious now. Like you said that to give a reason as to why he would have to be benched for 3 or 4 months, and therefore if the lineup worked without him, you could forget about him and not bring him into your 6-man lineup, which wasn't going to happen until he wasn't injured anymore, right? I think it was like a soft way to move him out of the team. But then again, with Smooya there and some of the things you've had going on behind the scenes, you don't want to kick him out entirely. Let's keep him just in case, shall we? So I think he was just benched, quite frankly. I don't actually buy the surgery angle, especially because now magically you don't need the surgery anymore. You know what? You don't not only don't need the surgery, but now that Smooya can't play anymore and the major's coming up, hey, actually you can play fine. Yeah, you know what? It's gotten a lot better. I still need to go to therapy. Oh, so it's not better than you should get up. No, but I can still play. So what my point here is, doesn't always work in sports, having sports psychology. Because do you think these people never thought of the concept of sports psychology, or that it was just never applied to their sports? No, it was. And this is a part of coaching. This is a part of strategies that people like this oftentimes actually go out and seek out and do put their mind to. But it doesn't work all the time in sports. And that's why there isn't some amazing guy in sports who you pay $10 million a year, but he'll fix your entire team and take all the big squads. So think of sports like baseball, basketball, where if you have the highest salary, the overall payroll, odds are you're going to make it very, very deep and have one of the best teams. What you'd do is, if you were going to do it, you'd get that team, and on the side, you'd pay some guy millions to be the sports psychologist. He'd fix everything up and you'd just win. You'd have the formula for winning. Hasn't been found, obviously. So why in esports would it work as simply and as obviously as that? It wouldn't, right? So, okay, none of this, despite the fact it sounds like I'm downplaying sports psychology, I'm not. I'm downplaying unrealistic and implausible expectations for sports psychologists, which wouldn't even be applied to sports psychologists in sports where there's millions and billions of dollars at play. So this is not to say that you shouldn't try sports psychology or sports psychology training. I actually think generally it would be a worthwhile approach for many teams to at least give it a try, give it a go. If it works, or it works for the player in question, great, then go with it. If it doesn't, look for something different. Try and match some of the different sort of player. Try and give them the different leadership strategy. Try and have a different communication hierarchy within the team. If the individual who is doing the sports psychology or sports psychology training is credible, then give it a go. I mean, as time goes on, we are going to find out who the best people are at this. And hopefully, just as with coaches, where we had a lot of bad coaches initially, we weeded out a lot of them. We found out who's good. And then the ones that are good can command a high salary from the best teams. I hope the same thing will happen with sports psychology, because it is definitely an area worth investigating for some teams, for some players, and for people from certain backgrounds. But it's not some magic panacea that will cure all that ails a team that gets into these difficult, dire straits.
For many years of my career in esports, it really was just me. I did it all. I was the one person driving myself forwards. I didn't have people around me to help me. But actually, one thing I've learned over the years is the value of a support network. And mine is, of course, the Skrilluminati, my Patreon community. So this video, like many on my channel, was made possible by Ahmed Hadjou, Frisky, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Do you want to ask a question for my regular AMA? Do you want to find out teasers? Who are the guests for the upcoming interviews? I often do. Maybe you want to be part of those long discussions where we can talk about whatever you want in esports. Well, if any of those tickle your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today. Support my content via the Patreon link in the description box below.